be decided after this race.
Just finally, I'm looking at Pecco's bikes and they both look pretty different. Am I right in thinking one's a 24 spec, one's a 25 spec? You're going to be using this morning as a bit of a test session to compare data from February?
As we always said, being a factory rider means that you can have different possibilities on the bike, so we have several parts that put together in one bike and in the other, and we'll see what will be his response after the test.
Thanks, Davide.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. As always, a very enlightening interview down there with the Ducati boss, Davide Tardozzi. Michele Pirro, the Ducati test rider, is once again standing in for Marc Marquez this weekend here in Malaysia. But as you heard there, it looks like new World Superbike Championship runner-up Nicolo Bulega is certainly being lined up for replacement rides in our final two Grand Prix in Portimao in Valencia, an upcoming test on the Desmos Adichie Ducati MotoGP machine at Jerez. Sounds like that one's not penciled in, Lewis. It sounds like it's already penned in. Bulega looks like he'll be on a GP bike, a MotoGP bike for the first time in competitive action in Portimao and Valencia. Something to look forward to.
Certainly is, and of course, as Davide pointed out there are two reasons why they would want to give Bulega that opportunity, not least because he's earned it. Second in the World Superbike Championship this year, certainly went down swinging in Jerez a week ago, it's fair to say. Not that it pleased everybody, particularly those Turks in attendance, as Toprak Razgatlioglu did clinch the championship in that tense final race of the season, but also because he's essentially going to be Ducati's test rider, or the rider ready to step in should they have another Marc Marquez injury, absence, or any of their factory riders out next season. Bulega will be first in line to step in, so they clearly want him to have some laps on the bike, have some experience on the bike, and we expect to see him in a couple of weeks' time in Portimao, a circuit that of course he knows very well from the World Superbike Championship earlier this year.
Yeah, they're also using him as one of the top developers alongside Michele Pirro, working on the new 850cc engine project with the Pirelli tyres. It's a smart move, isn't it, by Ducati, given Bulega's intimate knowledge of Pirelli rubber over in World Superbikes. They're using him a lot next year behind the scenes as a MotoGP test rider for the new 850cc project, and you have to feel that they're keeping one close eye on Bulega as a potential option for the 2027 MotoGP lineup, moving forward into the new 850cc / Pirelli tyre era. Well, here is Fermin Aldeguer, then one of our two most recent first-time winners in MotoGP. A bit of a comeback down to earth for the bump after the brilliance of Indonesia in Phillip Island last weekend. Speaking to a couple of his Gresini crew behind the scenes, it sounds like Aldeguer did exceptionally well to see the checker flag in the main Grand Prix over in Australia. He was really suffering with some wayward electronics, which sounded like he was making that GP24 a right old handful for Aldeguer. He did really, really well to get to the line.
In the end, he crossed the line in 14th place, 18 seconds. He described it as something of a disaster in Australia, but as you say, it wasn't exactly all his fault. So many expected so much of Aldeguer really in Australia, given that he'd taken victory there previously a year ago in Moto2, arriving on the back of his first MotoGP victory, but that never really looked up the cars, did it, in Phillip Island? Missed the top 10 and missed Q2 on Friday by just 0.005 of a second, and boy did that penalise him. It just underlines once again, if you get Friday wrong at any stage in a Grand Prix weekend or in a Grand Prix season, there is absolutely no recovery from that, or the chances of recovering are very slim indeed. Once Aldeguer missed the top two, or certainly missed the top two rows of the grid, got himself up to 7th on the grid, Aldeguer's hopes of taking back-to-back Malaysian Grand Prix victories were very, very slim. Here's Fabio Di Giannantonio. He's figure off 46 Ducati. Talked about riders who will perhaps regret qualifying too far down the grid. Fabio Di Giannantonio would certainly fall into that category. Certainly had a victory challenge in him. Had Di Giannantonio qualified anywhere sensible or anything like in line with the performance of his motorcycle, Di Giannantonio in 10th on the grid certainly had the performance to fight Fal Fernandez for victory, but was way too far back by the time he got himself to that group of traffic that were up behind Raul in that Grand Prix. That group that included the likes of Marco Bezzecchi, of course included Alex Marquez too, who was in the thick of that battle too, and Dicia got into 2nd place, but by the time he got there was way too far back. Let's head down to pit lane then. We already heard Jack there speaking to Davide Tardozzi about the differences between Pecco Bagnaya's bikes. What are you seeing, Jack?
Yeah, it looks to me like, as I said to Davide Tardozzi, we've got a 24 spec Ducati that Bagnaia has been using ever since the Misano test, which we all put down to a turnaround in form in Motegi. to compare that alongside it, which is currently being warmed up, is a 25 spec machine, a 25 chassis, 25 swing arm. I imagine a 25 ride height device is in there as well. It was even mentioned to me in passing yesterday in the paddock that they may well have wheeled across Michele Pirro's rolling chassis from Phillip Islands just a week ago in order to basically do an obvious back-to-back test this morning. The data that they've got from Sepang when they were last here is going to be absolutely crucial for them to try and work out exactly what is happening with Bagnaia, because Sky TV of Italy put to him yesterday, is this a technical problem? Is any sort of mental confidence lacking playing a part in it as well? And he was absolutely clear as Pecco Bagnaia. He said, no, this is technical. I'm not having a confidence crisis. This is nothing mental. There is a problem with the bike. And once Ducati get it sorted, I know what I can do. Just look at Motegi. So this a crucial morning for Ducati and Bagnaia, comparing those 25 and 24 items to try and get an understanding of what has gone wrong of late.
Yeah, thanks very much for that information, Jack. Back-to-back DNFs in a Grand Prix for Bagnaia for the first time since Catalonia and the Sachsenring 3 years ago in 2022. Phillip Island, of course, the third round, the last four, where he did not score a single point. It's been a pretty rough ride for Bagnaia over the course of this flyaway run. As we ride on board now with Fabio Di Gianantonio, had to climb off his sick bed, didn't he, last Sunday, to find just his third podium of the season in a Grand Prix. Hard work he gave himself after coming through from 10th place on the grid. Close to podium he was in the sprint, second behind Ralph Fernandez at the checker flag in that Sunday Grand Prix, and he did it with a very high fever. He said yesterday when I spoke to him in the pre-event press conference, while everybody else was out partying in their downtown Cowes on Sunday night on Phillip Island, he was tucked up in bed with a Lemsip, I think, at about 9 o'clock Sunday night, but feeling much better. I guess the podium, the best form of medicine as far as Digia is concerned.
And as I mentioned a moment ago, he needs to get himself a grid position tomorrow morning when we go qualifying. Fabio Di Gianantonio has only qualified on the front two rows in 5 of the 19 Grand Prix we've had so far this season, and that's why he's only been able to pick up the 3 podiums in Grand Prix. Somehow he's been able to pick up 4 sprint podiums, which you'd feel would be a lot harder to achieve when you're starting way back down the grid. But credit to Digia, he's been able to overcome his qualifying woes to pick up some valuable World Championship points. He's 17 points behind Pedro Acosta now. They're 5th and 6th in the World Championship. Pecco Bagnaia is 41 points up the road and could yet still be caught if, of course, he continues to struggle in the remainder of this season. Bagnaia, in turn, lost 3rd place in the World Championship last time out to Marco Bezzecchi, who is now 8 points ahead of the 2-time World Champion.
He's playing a bit of catch-up here this weekend, is Digia. Of course, he was missing from this Malaysian Grand Prix last year while he sat out the remainder of the season, having had pretty major surgery on a recovering left shoulder dislocated in the Sachsenring. And then, of course, it all went horribly wrong on his track return on the very first day of 2025 in winter testing here at Sepang back in February, when he had a pretty strong debut on day 1 on the GP25. And as he marked that happy return, a rather aborted wheelie coming out of turn 4 as the front wheel popped back on the ground going into turn 5. It sent Fabio on his backside and unfortunately fractured his left collarbone, which completely destroyed his whole pre-season. So he's missing a bit of recent track time, a bit of recent knowledge around this Sepang circuit. At the moment, 12th fastest, Pol Espargaro. Let's cover off a bit more housekeeping, shall we? We've touched upon Michele Pirro replacing Marc Marquez once again. Pol Espargaro is back on the KTM Tech 3 machine this weekend, standing in for Maverick Vinales and doing another stellar job as he's standing. Policho currently leads this early exchanges of FP1. Lorenzo Savadori's back for a play on the factory Aprilia with no Jorge Martin. Doubts as well about Jorge Martin being back at Fort Portimao in a couple of weeks' time. And Augusto Fernandez is a factory Yamaha wildcard once again here this weekend on board the new V4 as Pedro Acosta looks like he's taking a bit of an early tip-off in the second corner.
Fortunately for Pedro, it looks like a front-ender into turn 2. We've already seen this morning a big high side coming out of 2 for Joe Roberts in Moto 2, and they don't tend to end well. Costa's now just waiting for a gap in the traffic, which now opens up for Pedro to get his bike up and running. As you can see, it's very sharply downhill there, so he should be able to bump start that KTM now on the way down, and he has indeed. A little bit of gravel on the racetrack as he does so. We're just going to see the KTM come into view on its side, and there goes Pedro Acosta. Fortunately for him, that's about as slow a crash as you can have around this Sepang circuit.
Because Cashew minds back to the Sepang test on lap number 14 of his defence of the World Championship. He was right in that turn 2 when Jorge Martin's Nightmare 2025 began. A big high side, just 13 laps into the campaign on the Prix GP. Suffering hand and ankle injuries. I remember vividly those slow motion shots of Jorge when the visor flipped up and he was already wincing in agony before he come to a rest at the side of the track. There's bits of bodywork falling off of that factory KTM. You've got to be careful here because the stewards might be just wanting to have a little word in the ear of Acosta.
I'm sure he'll be coming back to the pits anyway, but he might be getting a black and orange flag soon to bring him straight up pit lane. Well, this is already looking slightly more positive for Pecco, isn't it? Of course, a two-time Malaysian Grand Prix winner, the unforgettable first 5 laps of last year's Malaysian Grand Prix, 24 hours after he really lost the World Championship in the sprint as he crashed at turn 9. Bagnaia winning that battle royale with Jorge Martin in the early stages before scampering off to victory, and Bagnaia leads this free practice 1 session early on a 2:00.04. Of course, his pole position of last year is some 4 seconds quicker than that.
Bit of a problem here as well early on for Jack Miller. Looks like he's had a technical on the Pramac Yamaha core. Jack was devastated. He was absolutely gutted, wasn't he, to crash out of podium contention in his home Grand Prix in Australia last weekend, having claimed his first front row start in nigh on 2 years on an excellent Saturday, fighting for the podium in that sprint. It all went wrong once again for the Aussie on Sunday. 14 points now is Jack Miller's tally from the last 7 Grand Prix. No top 10 on a Sunday in 7 since Brno. He said he just really can't catch a break, can he, right now, Miller, on Sundays. Just felt like maybe he wasn't really sure what caused that front end washout at Siberia early on at turn 6. Was it the fact he was carrying that extra fuel load over the full 27-lap Australian Grand Prix distance? Was it some of the Pirelli rubber that had been laid down by the Moto2 bikes earlier on in the day, which sometimes can wreak havoc with grip and feeling in MotoGP? But yeah, Miller, he was really, really upset. He was in tears, wasn't he? Having blown a great opportunity for another podium in front of his home crowd.
An opportunity awaits Yamaha this weekend, though, because we did see back in testing, there's a lot has changed in MotoGP since then, but it was here in Sepang where we really began to get excited about Yamaha's prospects for 2025. Fabio Quartararo was right up at the sharp end on both the time attack and over longer runs. Davide Tardozzi even said at the conclusion of that Sepang test that Yamaha were genuine competition for Ducati in 2025. That hasn't quite transpired that way, certainly not on Sundays. Saturday morning, certainly Yamaha rode a bike with Fabio Quartararo on board that can match the Ducatis, but not over race distance. Quartararo plummeting out of the equation, having taken pole in Australia last weekend. But this certainly, after their strong test earlier in the year, would have been a Grand Prix that Yamaha would have circled on their calendar as one that they could attack it.
Always a good measure, a good barometer of how much progress or lack of you've made throughout the Grand Prix season when you return a good 7 or 8 months to Sepang after the pre-season test here. Certainly for the rookies, of course, who had 6 days on track pre-season, as did Yamaha and Honda as part of their concessions. So it is always a good indicator of how much forward progress you've made. In terms of Fermin Aldeguer, who did those 6 days here in pre-season, well, no problemo for the 54 at the moment, because he's just, as you can see, just gone top of the timesheets with a 2:00.199. Joan Mir on the factory Honda's up to 3rd as Jack Miller gets a pushback from one of his Prima Pramac Yamaha crew. No obvious signs, left or right, was there, on Miller's M1 of any fall off. No damage to his leather, so it looks like it's just gone kaput early on. A hit for the Aussie.
Of course, we remind you, Jack Miller and the other 4 regular Yamahas are still on their inline force, so that may only last another 3 Grand Prix. Gustav Fernandez, of course, here once again on board the V4 Yamaha, which he and Fabio Quartararo in particular will be watching the progress of very, very closely as they have an eye to racing that model in 2026.
Yeah, got the impression from listening to some of our media colleagues after attending Fabio Quartararo's media debriefing yesterday in Sepang. He's once again in that sort of rut, getting a little bit weary of a lack of performance from the current incumbent at Wise Start M1. Pole position in Australia, never in contention for the sprint podium from that pole. Never in contention at all, was he, Fabio, for a top 10, really. I mean, he slipped way, way down the order to 11th at the checker flag. and some rather worrying messages. He's trying to G up those Yamaha engineers once again, isn't he? Saying right now, it's obvious his patience is wearing wafer thin. I need a competitive bike is the message from Fabio. Contract year, of course, next year in 2026 for 2027 and beyond. And the message loud and clear once again from the Quartararo camp. If this new V4 from Yamaha is not the cure of some serious ills on the current M1, well, Fabio will clearly be knocking on the door of some rival manufacturers looking for other job opportunities.
They're almost between a rock and a hard place at Yamaha at the moment, because the V4, I think most people agree, is the right way to go. But are they going to be able to develop it and get it to a stage by Valencia test where they can actually perform with it? Nice little raise of the eyebrows there with Pecco Bagnaia as he looked in the direction of Gigi Dall'Igna. Whether that was that felt good or whether that felt bad, he's shaking his head at the moment, but he is up in second place, is Pecco Bagnaia, so not all that he should be complaining about. Looks at his hand gestures there as if the front's washing a bit on that Ducati. That's the 24-esque model we understand that Bagnaia has just jumped off. And he's filling Gigi Dall'Igna on exactly how it felt.
Hard to believe, having dominated the weekend in Motegi, that he was 32 seconds behind the win. This is a look at Gigi Dall'Igna as he comes back into the garage. Yeah, that's a funny old expression, isn't it, from Pecco? He drops down the seat next to Christian Gabarini. Told himself on Sunday in Phillip Island after that miserable sprint where he was 32 seconds behind Bezzecchi in that 13-lap sprint, he would not finish last again. He said, I'd rather crash out 1,000 times fighting and pushing than finishing last. The bike, he said, was hard to ride in that Australian Grand Prix because something sounds like Ducati took a load of weight on the front end just to try and find some stability, which made it a little bit less agile, a little bit heavier, and that of course gives you sort of no margin for error. He said every time I try to force the bike I fall off. As Davide Tardozzi, Mauro Basili there, two members of the Ducati hierarchy have a little private exchange on the Ducati pit wall canopy.
Perhaps not the most pleasant of exchanges we've ever seen, although Davide Tardozzi does wear his heart on his sleeve. You're never in any doubt as to how Davide is feeling. Of course, we saw a week ago Pecco Bagnaia returned to the box partway through free practice one, jumped off his Ducati and said about 3 words before Tardozzi stomped out of the box. So angry he was, and clearly words of Pecco Bagnaia that Tardozzi did not want to hear. I mean, it's not looking too bad at the moment in terms of the lap times for Bagnaia. He's up in second place, but still clearly some work to do down in the 63 camp.
Yeah, Tardozzi's spoken a lot, hasn't he? We've tried our best. We've given Pecco all the support he needs. We've tried almost every avenue possible to try and find some solutions to his front-end woes this year. And he's spoken on more than one occasion about the need for Pecco to step up the plate as well. It's not just on Ducati to try and find some solutions. It's down to the rider as well. That's Bagnaia then. Surely he'll be slightly chirpier with a second place in an FP1 session, where for so much of these flyaway races, well, bar the 3 days on circuit in Japan, Bagnaia has gone AWOL. He has disappeared without trace. He was nowhere throughout Mandalika weekend. The Australia sprint was, I think he said himself, an embarrassing and humiliating experience. 32 seconds behind Bezzecchi. I mean, it was. He was a face as red as his factory Ducati. As there's more crucial development miles put on what is a very striking looking new Yamaha V4 project. Augusto Fernandez at the moment doing a high 202s on that new bike. 2.7 seconds he is adrift of our fastest rider Aldeguer, who's still comfortably clear early doors in this Sepang Grand Prix weekend. Aldeguer's 2:00.199 over a quarter of a second that clear of Bagnaia.
Yeah, I was just saying before we saw that facial expression of Bagnaia on his return to the pits about the V4, and the difficulty Yamaha have is that yes, they're going in the right direction by following the V4 route, but is that V4 going to be anything like ready by the Valencia test to convince Fabio Quartararo that it's a bike worth sticking with beyond 2026? Quartararo is not going to be in any mood to hang around. He said yesterday, speaking to our colleague Elliot York, that it doesn't really matter to him whether he makes his decision in January or in July next year. It's still going to be something of a gamble and a roll of the dice with the regulations reset for 2027. So that was almost Quartararo indicating that he's not got an awful lot to lose by making the decision early the next season. And Yamaha really got to convince convince Fabio. It's not about Fabio convincing Yamaha, it's the other way around. Yamaha have got to convince their 2021 world champion that they've got a motorcycle worth sticking with for the future, and it's a motorcycle that will be based on this model that you're looking at now. Of course, it's the second time this season we have seen this V4 on the racetrack in competitive action. Of course, we saw it at Misano when it did have some reliability issues, it's fair to say, in amongst some fairly promising performance, but Fabio Quartararo not exactly impressed with it when he tested it on the Monday following that San Marino Grand Prix. So this is the second competitive outing for the Yamaha V4 and Augusto Fernandez.
One bike that is not lacking performance, is not lacking a competitive edge right now, is the factory Aprilia in the hands of Marco Bezzecchi. Back-to-back sprint wins in Mandalika and in Phillip Island, and really, had things gone his way, he really should have won both Grand Prix in Mandalika and in Australia. He was by far in both the fastest rider, the quickest rider on circuit. Of course, the first lap collision with Marc Marquez ruling him out in Mandalika, and then the subsequent double long lap penalty as a result was always going to make it a mountain to climb for him in Australia. He said, when I spoke to him after the Grand Prix in Phillip Island, he never felt like he had the potential to win the race on Sunday. He said that was more of a journalist's media hype thing. He was always being very much more realistic, more cautious tone was coming out of the Bezzecchi camp pre-Australian Grand Prix. He actually said he didn't expect to be on the podium. The time that he lost in that Aussie Grand Prix, which we saw dropping back to 6th place, he thought that was going to be too much to get back through. Back through though he did. Another brilliant performance by Bez. You might have seen that graphic at the start of the broadcast. 7 podiums now in 2025, as mentioned on Sunday. That is now a new record as far as an Aprilia rider is concerned in terms of single season podiums in their history. The previous best was Aleix Espargaro, 6 in 2022, and as Marco said yesterday in the previous press conference, he's not done, he wants more. Still 3 more opportunities to go to maybe the first rider in MotoGP history on an Aprilia to find double-figure podiums.
We flagged it up before the race took place, and it proved to be the case when they went racing. But it wasn't so much the time that Bezzecchi lost in the long lap penalty loop, it was the time he lost in traffic once he'd served those 2 long lap penalties, because you can't say that he did anything wrong in the first part of the race. He did the absolute maximum he could by getting himself up the road so that when he served his first long lap penalty, he was close to the front of the race. He was in 3rd, behind the top 2 of Raul Fernandez and Pedro Acosta, but then once he served his second, he dropped himself back to 6th place, as you mentioned, and didn't have the ultimate pace of performance to pass Pedro Acosta quickly in those laps following the long lap penalty, his second of 2, which ultimately cost Marco Bezzecchi any hope of victory. Had he only had 1 long lap penalty last weekend in Australia, I think he would still have won the Australian Grand Prix. 2, though, was too many.
And he also said, doing those sequence of 127s at the start of the Grand Prix, he did just take a little bit too much performance out of the rear tyre to try and make that early decisive gap and limit the damage of the 2 long laps, and taking nothing away from Raul Fernandez, because Fernandez was just superb, absolutely brilliant, wasn't he? That was a high pressure situation for Fernandez, who's had some doubters, he's had some fierce critics throughout his MotoGP career. Well, he spent a long time at the front of that Australian Grand Prix, and he did not make a single mistake. A very welcome early 25th birthday present for Raul, who turned 25, number 25 here yesterday. And fair play to him as well. He honoured a bet with some of his Trackhouse crew, which includes his crew chief Noé Herrera. If he got his first MotoGP podium, well, they would shake their heads. And I bumped into Raul in downtown Phillip Island in Cowes on Monday morning, and it was already job done. So welcome to the Baldy Brotherhood, Raul. He won the Australian Grand Prix, but lost all of his hair. I guess he'll be lighter, a little bit lighter down the long, fast straights here in Sepang.
Well, it makes a change from having torn his hair out in previous Grand Prix experiences. You saw before the session got underway, he is the top point scorer in the last 3 Grand Prix weekends, is Raul Fernandez, proving that it wasn't just a streaky, fluky Sunday afternoon in Phillip Island. He well and truly earned it off the back of a first sprint podium a week prior, or a Grand Prix prior, in Indonesia. This, though, feels like the ultimate test, though, from an Aprilia point of view, to prove that they genuinely do have a Ducati beta in MotoGP these days. Sepang has never been their strongest venue, either in testing or in Grand Prix action. Of course, we've seen in previous years the Aprilia cooking its riders when the scorching hot temperatures of Sepang haven't exactly meshed well with that factory Aprilia RSGP. So there's no question that if Aprilia are competitive enough to challenge for victory here this weekend, then we can take them very seriously as a potential title threat for 2026.
Massimo Riva, Aprilia Racing CEO, said now on fast and flowing tracks, in his opinion, it's pretty obvious, he says, that Aprilia is now the reference motorcycle. He did make a couple of interesting points post-Australian Grand Prix as well, when he was asked a few questions about Raul Fernandez, Aprilia and Trackhouse sticking with their rider through some pretty turbulent times. Curious, he said, now to see what happens with Fernandez in the remainder of this season, because he made a point about Marco Bezzecchi when Bez got the monkey off his back, his first Aprilia win in that dramatic British Grand Prix. Bez's form then just took off. It was like the click that he needed. I can do it on an RSGP. Now I want more. And Riva, well, he's just curious, interesting, like we all are, just to see if the sort of similar effects as Alex Marquez has gone down. Alex Marquez is one of the big favourites for success here this weekend. He tries to wrap up second in the World Championship. Well, Alex has taken a tumble going through turn 7, which is a pretty quick get off around this Sepang circuit. Third gear going through there, 130 kilometres an hour. Alex has jumped off, having just set his fastest lap of the session of 2:00.720. 6 was Alex.
Yeah, he was on 2 red sectors too prior to that point, so clearly pushing on. You can see how dark the sky is getting here in Sepang. There are some forecasts suggesting that rain is heading our way over the course of the day. It might be getting here a little sooner than we think, looking at the skies overhead at the moment. If Marquez wins the sprint tomorrow afternoon, he will secure second in the World Championship and the Marquez family double, but not the ideal start to his weekend. It's in the middle of 7, and a nasty little lip of the curb there as he was sent firing over into the gravel champ, but Alex very quickly to his feet. Of course, he had a couple of crashes in qualifying last weekend, including a fast one at turn 1. Alex, though, would appear to be A-OK.
Yeah, 2 or 3 big barrel rolls through the gravel trap then for Alex. He'll be frustrated with that one. You can see the airbag gone off, doing its job. Tucking the front then, going through 7. So 2 named Spaniards who we think will be main protagonists here this weekend, Acosta and Alex. They've already taken FP1 tumbles. Quite a pronounced lip there on the edge of the curve as well, isn't it? You saw Bygone rider get flipped up into the air. Jack Miller, having had his early tech issues, has just got himself up inside the top 10 in 9th place for Prima Pramac Yamaha. We've got good first sectors being produced by both Bezzecchi and Marini, 2 Italians. We jump on board now with Bez. He's got a brand new medium front tyre on, as you can see on the graphic. Bezzecchi, of course, P3 in for the pilot last weekend, with another miserable experience for Bagnaia means Bezzecchi did climb into P3 in the championship, sort of kicking Bagnaia while he's down. I mean, Bagnaia has been sort of a serial occupier of the top 3 in the last couple of years. First time he's dropped out of the top 3 all season long, with this late rally being produced by Aprilia and Bez.
Yeah, with Portimao and Valencia to come, Bagnaia is going to need a bounce back to take that 3rd place in the World Championship. Almost sounded resigned yesterday to that, Bagnaia, when he was speaking to the assembled journalist, that he might have to accept that, given his current situation, he's going to have to accept 4th or maybe even 5th in the World Championship. He's 41 points ahead of Pedro Acosta in 5th place in the World Championship, so a long way to go before Bagnaia is in danger of losing that 4th place, but that just gives you a window into how the 63 is feeling right now.
Well, what a weekend it was in Australia last time out for Raul Fernandez and for the Trackhouse MotoGP team. The Americans' first success in the Premier Class, and they did it in some style, didn't they? Fernandez has been red hot in the last 2 sprints as well over in Indonesia and Australia. I'm sure there was a big party on Sunday night, so we can check how the Monday morning headaches were right now and how those celebrations went. Jack Appleyard joined by the Trackhouse boss, Davide Brivio.
Yeah, great to be down here with Davide after that huge success for the team just a few days ago. First question, Davide, is we see Raul yesterday with no hair. I'm looking here in the back of the box. Noe Herrera's Fuji has also shaved the hair off. A couple of the team members in Pat and Tommy I see here also shaved the hair, but you've got away with it. How come you haven't shaved your head as well?
Yeah, probably they didn't dare to do it to me, I think, which I'm glad. And yeah, that was a little bit of a bad. And yeah, we had some shaving performance on Sunday night, and yeah, I'm glad they didn't approach me.
Absolutely, but looking on the performance itself, it was incredible from Raul, from taking a lead from Pedro. He looked in control from there. Having watched the race back, how impressed with you when he was on the verge of making history, becoming a MotoGP race winner for the very first time, after everything he's been through, just how controlled and how calm he was in Philippines.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, more than happy to have won the race. Great, fantastic. I'm very happy the way the win came, the way he managed the race, because as I say, there's been a lot of talk with the engineers about tire management, how critical is the Phillip Island by the end of the race with tires, and he just did everything perfect. Also, when Pedro overtook him, he stayed calm, in control, waiting, and so from this point of view, he positively surprised me, because it's the first time we see him doing this in MotoGP. I was a little bit worried, can he manage, can he keep going, but he did everything perfect, very well. So I'm very happy for this, and he showed maturity, and I hope we can keep using from now on.
And I think it's something you'll agree on that we could see from the outside, that maturity maybe wasn't there in the first couple of years of his MotoGP career, and he's had to do a lot of learning. How much has he developed as a person as well as a rider to be able to get that success?
I didn't follow, I mean, I was not working with Raul in the first 2 years. I have a very personal ideas about that, and probably he switched from Moto2 to MotoGP maybe too early, and also coming from 8 wins in Moto2 probably was feeling like ready for MotoGP, which is not the case. When you come, you have to learn, you have to go. So probably he had also some up and down on building up his mindset, to accept that in a MotoGP he might have struggles, and also I don't know, he changed team in the first, after 1 year, 2 years, so probably now is a little bit of more stability, the same bike, same team for 2-3 years, same people around, maybe that's also helped. And of course he has to be aware how difficult is the MotoGP, how hard he has to work. This winter he worked a lot on improving his physical condition, which last year was a little bit critical. So I think it's getting mature also outside of the track. The maturity is also outside of the track, and everything helps. A good bike, a good development from Aprilia, his experience, stability, people around, all together, you know. It's a big package when you put this together.
Just finally, last question on the other side of the box. When we were last here in February, I was really quick. We can see the level of the Aprilia now, we can see the level of the team. How big of a weekend is this for for everything to hopefully come together and for him to get the opportunity to show his level?
Yeah, we can't wait to see I again at the top, because he does have the potential. We have a full belief in his potential and what he can do. I know he can do. This year we went through a couple of bad injuries, so there is a stop and go on his season, but I'm sure he will put everything together for the next season. This will be a really learning season, but let's see. Also, this weekend can be not so bad for him. He likes hot weathers, hot conditions, and yeah, I have full confidence that we will see him soon on the top.
Thanks, Davide, and as the rain arrives as well, it's starting to chuck it down here in pit lane. Back to you guys.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Thanks to Davide Brivio. Yes, well, he was in heaven last weekend, wasn't he? For Raul Fernandez, the heavens have opened here in Sepang, and that is going to be an end of session in terms of slick tyre action. You just saw there Pedro Acosta was wide into the first corner. We're just about to click into monsoon season here in this part of Southeast Asia. I'm reliably informed by the locals. Of course, it's a tropical climate here in this part of the world as we get a replay once again of Alex Marquez's mid-session tip-off then going through turn 7. It looks like, though, with the rain coming, that it's going to be his teammate Fermin Aldeguer on the Gresini Racing Ducati that will end FP1 fastest, because it is absolutely bucketing down here in Sepang. This rain coming a little bit later than what I think a few was anticipated, about an hour and 20 minutes after the initial forecast that showed rain was forecast. Potential threat of rain around here tomorrow as well. Looking like we're well set for a dry Sunday, but of course this tropical climate, rapidly changing climate, anything could happen. It's pretty unpredictable in this part of the world.
Yeah, the sky is black overhead. It's so dark that we've had to turn the commentary box light on. You saw it when Bagnaia came into the pits a couple of minutes before the rain hit, that the flash bulbs of the photographers were so bright because of how dark it is. So you've got the likes of Pedro Acosta, who went straight on into turn 1, they're having to go by at walking speed back to the pits because it is so wet. Of course, they are still out there on slick tyres. We've got Joan Zarco, Augusto Fernandez, Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta, who are all still on the racetrack and still trying to recover their way back. They had just gone across the finish line when the monsoon hit.
Yeah, Brad Binder working his way back to pit lane is 59 seconds behind Fermin Aldeguer, which sounds about my pace, and that's being generous. So it looks like Aldeguer then will close out FP1 fastest ahead of Bagnaia and Joan Mir. Now we're getting this deluge here on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur. Just quickly coming back to Davide Brivio's chat with Jack. I think Brivio himself, he's not a sort of an egomaniac, an egotistical character, is Davide, but let's not forget he's a team manager that's now won Grand Prix in MotoGP for Yamaha, for Suzuki, and now for Aprilia. And he's done so much work himself to help and steer and nurture what is unquestionably a lot of talent that Raul Fernandez has. Maybe just lacked a little bit of guidance. Brivio's got hold of the 25-year-old. I think by his own admission, Raul has said there's been several behind-the-scenes heart-to-hearts they've had. Sometimes some home truths have had to come the way of young Fernandez, but it's whether you listen and whether you take it on board that's the difference, and clearly he has. So I think Davide Brivio has been a real key figure behind the scenes as far as Raul Fernandez's progression is concerned. And both Marco Bezzecchi and Raul touched upon this in the pre-event press conference yesterday. They both spoke in glowing terms yesterday about the influence of a new Aprilia tech boss Fabiano Sterlachini, saying that he really is a guy that offers a lot of guidance, a lot of knowledge and experience, not just in pit lane but out of the paddock as well. So yeah, they both were crediting Sterlachini with Aprilia's current spurting success.
Pedro Acosta there indicating that he needed a rudder and some oars potentially when he got down to turn 1 rather than the KTM RT16 that he was equipped with. But I think it's fair to say that I don't think it's unfair on Raul Fernandez to say that perhaps he demonstrated his relative immaturity when he first moved up to MotoGP, but he certainly has taken major strides where that's concerned. That was Pedro Acosta arriving into turn 1 with slick tyres on a rapidly wet racetrack and having to dig his way out of the gravel jab at turn 1. Approaching there, of course, on a factory KTM at 330 kilometres an hour with a wall of rain in his face.
Well, he's the shark, and these are big fish conditions right now here in Sepang. Pedro Acosta once again, head and shoulders the standout KTM rider, wasn't he, in that Phillip Island Grand Prix, reading off yet another top 5 finish. But a little bit like Quartararo, feels like now his talent's being handcuffed somewhat by the machinery underneath him. KTM seem to be suffering more than any manufacturer in terms of managing the rear tyre. When they have a drop in grip, it's a lot more pronounced, a lot more severe than some of the rivals around him. Acosta is getting hard to understand why KTM is suffering so much grip deterioration, even when he's in sort of tyre management mode as well. He said, I could understand it more if I was just grabbing a handful of throttle on the exit of every corner and pushing my maximum. But in Phillip Island, he said he was riding at about 70% and still saw the rear tyre drop off a cliff. I think he's getting a little bit tired of this, Lewis. You know, it's, as he touched on yesterday, you know this is a big problem for KTM when the ultimate tyre whisperer himself, Enea Bastianini, we know how good Enea is at getting worn tyres to a finish line with hot pace. Even Enea struggling on the KTM. Brad Binder touched upon this as well. Clearly clearly the one area where KTM needs to identify where that, well, I'm sure they have identified, but where they have to improve at RC16 is getting more endurance, more durability out of that rear tyre.
Well, they've got 4 very different riders with very different riding styles and different skill sets, and none of them can get that rear tyre to the end of a Grand Prix in anything like the kind of condition of their rivals, which is the major KTM shortcoming at the moment. And it certainly won't be lost on Pedro Acosta, the stat that we've already mentioned a couple of times during the broadcast, that he's one of only 4 full-time riders now on the MotoGP grid without a victory. Luca Marini and the rookies of Ayagura and Somke Achantra are the others, and with no disrespect intended to other riders on the grid, Pedro Acosta will be looking at some of the riders who have MotoGP victory ceiling. If I had the kind of equipment you had, I would have several MotoGP victories to my name. And although he's of course still very early in his Grand Prix career and still only 21 years of age, Pedro Acosta is not going to hang around on uncompetitive machinery for too much longer.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention names, but I did catch up with some of his KTM crew last time I was at the luggage carousel here in Kuala Lumpur on Tuesday morning after our overnight flight from Melbourne. And they said it is abundantly clear we have the rider, we have the talent, we have one of the best riders on the MotoGP grid right now. It's time for KTM really to deliver a package that can help Acosta get into the winner's enclosure in MotoGP. So as the rain tips down here in Sepang, it's been a bit of a mixed start to this Malaysian Grand Prix so far for Gresini Racing. Fermin Aldeguer will end FP1 fastest after his dry 2:00.199. But a tip off at turn 7 for Alex Marquez. Let's get the thoughts of the boss, Michele Massini, who's with Jack.
Yeah, as in the background, the teams work feverishly to try and get one of the bikes prepped for these wet conditions to get at least one lap in. But Michele, we arrived here in Sepang thinking that Alex was going to be a huge contender, but hasn't looked comfortable this morning. Have you got an idea why that is?
Yeah, first of all, in the first run, we find something strange in the feeling with the medium rear tire, so we decided to change it. Was faster, but unluckily we crashed. But I think that we already shown some speed in the sector. We need to put all together as always, and also we look at the data. We have something to adjust on also on the bike, on the setting, and now we will try to exit with the rain bike to try at least some start from the grid.
Yeah, we can hear one of the bikes just exiting, a KTM or Paul Espargaro, the first out. For me, how valuable are these conditions for him going to be? I mean, the last time it was wet, Le Mans, I think it was, he was extremely fast, but I guess as a rookie, trying to get out and have at least a couple of laps is going to be vital experience.
Yeah, it's true that he rode really less this season on the wet, but very comfortable from the beginning that we tried the rain on the MotoGP bike. Also, he find a good feeling with the dry today. So at the moment we are on the first in the standing. So we started the Friday in the good shape.
Looks as though Fermin's ready to go. Thanks, Michele.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks, as always, to Gresini Racing boss Michele Massini. As we saw Paul Espargaro replacing Maverick Vinales' venture out. I was going to say, I don't know about leathers, he might need his swimming trunks out there at the moment. Oh, Paul, it is absolutely pouring down here in Malaysia. There's no obvious signs. I look out of our commentary box window off into the distance of any signs of any blue sky. There's been a lot of...
Quartararo nearly lost the front there at 20 miles an hour into turn 1, so there's no wonder that Pecco Bagnaia still has his baseball cap on and is not too keen to join the racetrack right now.
Yeah, there'll be a few riders going, thank you very much, I'm parking the... I'm not going, oh yeah, Quartararo again, has a moment there as he drops down through this high-speed turn 3, standing water. We know that this Sepang International Circuit does drain incredibly well, but there's still going to be pockets and patches of standing water to negotiate around this circuit. Quartararo, Rins' factory Yamaha teammate Paul Espargaro, Fermin Aldeguer are already out of pit lane. Just about to join them is Marco Bezzecchi's factory Aprilia.
It's bordering on red flag conditions. I doubt they will red flag it because there's only 2.5 minutes remaining of the session, so they might as well just run this session to a conclusion and then assess the conditions before we're back out for Moto 3 in around about an hour and 3/4 from now when they're out for their crucial practice session. Paul Espargaro, though, as you can see, through the monsoon temperatures, losing it, aquaplaning. That's what aquaplaning looks like, as the tread blocks on these wet tyres fill up with water. They're no longer clearing the water away, and you just float on top of the surface.
He's done well, actually, to stay on two wheels there, as Pol Espargaro. Yeah, these are not conditions conducive to hot laps around the Sepang International Circuit. Right now, Pol Espargaro's thinking, when's Maverick Vinales coming back to New York? I was going to say, when's Maverick Vinales back in action? Alex Marquez will be another rider that's just going to venture out. Let's see on the electronic dash there as he went from neutral up into first gear to leave the garage. You do wonder what sort of an impact this weather might have if it continues at this sort of rate for the remainder of the day. So unpredictable though, when the rain and how strong it will be in this part of the world. Jack, what's going on down in pit lane weather-wise?
Yeah, this is as intense a rain as we've seen all over the past 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I won't be surprised if we maybe see a red flag. I know there's not long of the session left, but it's really torrential rain at the moment now.
Yeah, it's teeming down without any question. We're picking up Quartararo, who's running off circuit. Well, he's already had a couple of scares, as Quartararo at the start of this lap, he's off the track on the extensive tarmac runoff, dropping down the hill through turn 12. And this will be... Yeah. Oh! Well, Pol Espargaro and Fabio Quartararo need to buy a lottery ticket, because they're both pretty fortunate to still be on two wheels in this very, very damp ending to this FP1 session here in Sepang.
Passenger, when that happens, there's absolutely nothing Fabio Quartararo can do about that. The wet tyres, in which they are outstanding, a shake of the head there for Fabio Quartararo there, as he's looking over at one of the Ducati riders who's just left pit lane, I think, on his inside, and saying that this is a little bit too much to be throwing these incredibly trick motorcycles around. You can see how much water the Quartararo's clearing away now as he drops through turn 3 up towards the relatively shallow end of turn 4. Quartararo will be quite pleased to see the checkered flag in a moment.
I remember one year in that hollow at turn 3 when we had real monsoon conditions in winter testing. The session had to be halted because it was about 6 foot deep. To see a circuit worker sort of wade their way through to try and find a drain on the outside of turn 3 to try and unblock it and get some of the extensive water drained away, as Ralph Fernandez, that's also dropping down into 12, isn't it, where Quartararo had his aquaplaning moment. This is anything but plain sailing right now, isn't it?
He's saying we should be stopping this session. Well, the session is now over, checkered flag is out, but I think he's saying that we shouldn't be on the racetrack right now. Of course, there is still a practice start session supposed to be taking place after this. Don't know how much use that's going to be. Once again, as you can see, that little river of standing water across the racetrack into 12, and it immediately spits the Trackhouse Aprilia out of line.
These guys aren't even pushing. There's no wet tyres in the world with the grooves that are going to dissipate this amount of water. So Ralph Fernandez, Fabio Quartararo and Pol Espargaro are thankfully going to end this wet ending to this FP1 session upright, it looks like. So Ralph Fernandez then goes through the gearbox, splashes his way down the long start finish straight here in Sepang on the Trackhouse Aprilia, which he nearly fell off at turn 12 in the aquaplaning moment. What a weekend that was for Aprilia last time out in Australia. 2 RSGPs on the podium for the first time in 2.5 years since Catalonia 2023. Marco Bezzecchi looking in great form once again. Let's get the thoughts of Aprilia boss Paolo Bonora, who's with Jack.
Yeah, it's the big question we've all been speaking about in the media, I feel like, for the past week. Is Aprilia the best bike on the MotoGP grid right now? So I'll put that to you, Paolo. Have you got the best bike on the grid currently?
No, for sure. We are totally convinced that we are now in a good moment. For sure, we are confirming that we did a step forward compared the starting of the season, but we know that we are now in a good moment. But we have to improve the bike, because Phillip Island is something that we appreciate so much. We love that the kind of layout, and was particularly suitable for Marco Bezzecchi. But here there will be a different track layout, and we would like to see if the improvement that we did, in particular in the stability and in hard braking zone, is confirmed here in this track layout. Is quite completed the
quite complete this Sepang layout. So it's very important for us to have some confirmation.
Marco's form at the moment, mark aside, is the best on the grid. He's been phenomenal, and you have to take into account first year in a factory team, having done all the pre-season by himself. I mean, you guys must be amazed at the levels he's performing at currently.
Absolutely amazed by his level. Absolutely happy about his way of working and his open mind way of thinking. So he came to us in the starting of the season with the correct approach. He didn't say something, you have to do this and that, but he was listening to us. It was a natural process of improving between us and him. And to be honest, we are so happy about his way of understanding our bike and how he can explain to us his problem and his thought. So at the moment we can only say thanks to him, thanks to his job, thanks to the job of Lorenzo as well, because he did a hard job during the season to develop many things. And yeah, we have also the confirmation that we did a good job, because in Trackhouse side, when we bring all the package and the support is now at 100% since the start was, but we have the confirmation that we did a great job also with them.
We've seen Jorge Martin working really hard at the Red Bull Performance Centre in Salzburg in Austria. How close, how likely is it that we see him return in Portimao?
Yes, he did a great job in Austria. His recovery plan is fully under the correct time plan. At the moment, we are now evaluating his situation with the support for sure of the medical staff of Dorna. And to be honest, we can't say, as we said the last GP, that we have a clear picture. At the moment, we have not a clear picture, so we have to wait until the next to understand if we will join Portimao or Valencia.
That's good to know. In case you guys didn't hear, a decision early next week as to whether we'll see Jorge Martin. Thank you, Paolo.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks as always to Pirelli boss Paolo Bonora. Yeah, caught up with some of those close to Jorge Martin early on this week in Malaysia, and they did sound like the noises coming out of Martin's crew that possibly Portimao just 1 week, maybe too early. They'll just give him that extra week to recover and then get back for the final Grand Prix of the campaign in Valencia. He's given an opportunity to finish at 2025, which started in dismal fashion here with the big crash in Sepang testing, and then it's been just a painful, wretched experience for most of it, hasn't it, for Jorge Martin? As the practice start session then is underway, what will be one of our wettest practice start sessions of 2025.
I'm not sure how useful this is going to be honest, as an exercise, but we'll follow it anyway, because the grid is absolutely drenched. We're in a very luxurious position. Right outside us is the start-finish line and the grid, for which they will launch away from 3 p.m. local time tomorrow for the 10-lap TISO sprint. Fabio Quartararo has absolutely no interest in joining the practice start session at all.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fabio's had enough at the end of that 45-minute FP1 session. That moment he had at turn 12, I think, convincing Fabio that he'll exercise a bit of caution in the tail end of this FP1 session. Johan Zarco, well, we know what an adept and accomplished wet weather rider he is. Just cast your minds back to that unforgettable home Grand Prix in Le Mans, the flag-to-flag encounter. Feels like an awful long time ago though, Dan, doesn't it, for the 35-year-old Frenchman who has had at least one DNF Sprint or Grand Prix in 5 of the last 6 rounds. 6 rounds now in 19, he's not scored a single point. And that 9th place recently in Motegi, he's only top 10 in 12 since that 2nd place at Silverstone. Just seems to have been disturbed by the sort of the arrival of some new parts, throwing him off the scent a little bit in terms of the setup with his RC213V. You feel like Zarco's been chasing his tail for the sort of latter part of 2025 as we look at Pol Espargaro then get to fire up what is arguably the best starting motorcycle in Grand Prix right now, certainly the fastest in history. And we saw it a couple of times over in Phillip Island, what an absolute rocket ship the RC16 was off the line once again.
Yeah, we have seen this in the past, of course, when we've had wet conditions for this practice start session, but we could indeed have an additional practice start session after the format later on this afternoon. That is not unprecedented given how little use these practice starts are going to be, unless we do get, of course, wet conditions for the sprint or the Grand Prix later in the weekend.
Who's parked it then, Jack? Who's not ventured out for a practice start?
Yeah, I've just done a sprint down pit lane to understand who isn't out there. Can confirm there's no Luca Marini, none of the 4 Yamahas, so Miller, Oliveira, Quartararo and Rins have all parked it. Neither of the VR46 duo, Frankie Morbidelli and Fabio Gianantonio, nor Pedro Acosta, nor Enea Bastianini. So those are the riders that have decided to sit out this practice start section.
Excellent sprinting work down there in pit lane as always, Jack. There is Luca Marini. 2 factory Hondas in the dry conditions inside the top 6 when it was dry. The Hondas were fast. Me at 3rd quickest, Marini 6th fastest.
Problems here for Ralph Fernandez. You can see him there grabbing away at the front brake to try and get the start device engaged. He has got it engaged in the end. Some movement there as Ralph Fernandez leaves the line, but he was getting a little bit hot in the collar there before he left the grid.
The initial launch away was brilliant, and then of course he just got the wheel spin as he started going through the gears on that run out of the off the front of the grid. It's Pedro Acosta's crew, who at the moment have a rather relaxed experience as he decides not to venture out for this practice start session.
Still see the standing water as they approach. This is turn 9 now that Brad Binder and John Zarco are approaching. Of course, with plenty of elevation change, the water does just sit in various places on the racetrack. We already saw into 12 the water gathering around some of the negative camber parts of this race at the final corner. It's going to drain away to the outside of the racetrack, so they won't have quite so many problems through that part of the racetrack. Here's Pecco Bagnaia then at the inside of Somkiat Chantra, one rider who, as I was looking outside the commentary box window, looking over the grid, one rider who did have a miserable practice start, had an absolute shocker, was Juan Mir on the factory Honda. He completely spanned his Honda up and just had to leave the grid and abort his start altogether.
Pol Espargaro then back to the head of the grid. You can just see him there dropping down the whole shot starting device on the KTM RC16. He drops the clutch, and that's a pretty good launch away. Once again, rain or shine, the KTM really feels like it's unrivaled in terms of getting the initial launch off the line once the clutch is dropped. Then once you start clicking through the gearbox as well with that abundance of power that we know the RC16 has. How many times has the fast starting KTM got some of their riders out of some deep grid positions?
I'm not entirely sure that Pol Espargaro was supposed to come back round to the grid again, in fairness, because the red light panels are now flashing outside our window, and they were flashing when Pol pulled up to indicate that the track is now closed. Come up pit lane. Don't think he'll get into too much trouble. That may be a little slap around the wrist for that, but the rest of the field are now coming up pit lane. This practice session has now been curtailed, and as mentioned, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they add an extra one at the end of practice here later on today, if it is indeed dry.
Probably ready for a flag-to-flag bike swap from Marco Bezzecchi, which didn't really go according to plan at all, did it? As Bess seemed to get his leg tangled up with the rear of that #1 Aprilia RSGP. Very in-depth discussion going on here between Bagnaia and one of his factory Ducati crew as he trudges into the back of the factory Ducati garage and ends FP1 second fastest, which is a positive sign, to say the least, for Bagnaia, who's had some fraught Fridays on our flyaway tour. Second quickest, so a 2:00.455 before the rainstorms lashed this Sepang International Circuit. Nobody there, and a cheeky wink there to his crew from Fermin Aldeguer. job done from the Spaniard, a 2:00.199. Joan Mir led the Honda charge in third place. Pol Espargaro, who led the early part of that FP1 session in the drive, finished fourth. Another brilliant performance by the Tech 3 replacement rider. Informed Bezzecchi was fifth. Two factory Hondas, as mentioned, inside the top six. Alex Marquez P7 after his high-speed crash at turn 7. Quartararo 8th. It was an eventful session, wasn't it? An eventful start of this Malaysian Grand Prix as far as Miller is concerned. An early tech problem costing Jack some track time, and then we saw him take a spill at turn 15 before the rain started. Miller, though, still inside the top 10 in 9th, with Acosta rounding out your top 10.
And your Australian Grand Prix winner, Raul Fernandez, in 19th spot. Very difficult to take any firm lessons learned from that session, really, given the curtailing of dry running by the downpour. And I guess as we look ahead to this afternoon, it will be eyes to the skies once again. Are we going to have a dry practice session? 1 hour of running to come later on today, where of course we'll be fighting it out for Q2 places. A lot of sunshine peeking through the clouds to help dry this track up. So who knows, we could well find ourselves in for a weather-affected afternoon of running, with Moto3 out on track in about an hour and a half for their crucial practice session. Fermin Aldeguer, quickest overall then, just shy of the 2-minute mark, ahead of... We already saw into 12 the water.
Next week as to when
develop many things and him, and to be honest, we are so happy about his way of understanding our bike and how he can explain to us his problem and his thought. So at the moment we can only say thanks to him. So he came to us a season.
Mark aside is the best on the grid. He's been phenomenal, and you have to take into account first year in a factory team, having done all of pre-season by himself. I mean, you guys must be amazed at the levels he's performing at currently.
Absolutely amazed by his level. Absolutely happy about his way of working and his open mind way of thinking. So he came to us in the starting of play. Here in this track layout is quite completed quite complete this Sepang layout, so it's very important for us to have some good moment where we have to improve the bike, because Phillip Island is something that we appreciate so much. We love that the kind of layout, and was particularly suitable for Marco Bezzecchi. But here there will be a different track layout, and we would like to see if the improvement that we did, in particular in the stability and in hard braking zone, is confirmed here in this track layout. Is quite completed quite complete this Sepang layout, so it's very important for us to have some confirmation.
Marco's form at the moment, Mark aside, is the best on the grid. He's been phenomenal, and you have to take into account first year in a factory team, having done all of pre-season by himself. I mean, you guys must be amazed at the levels he's performing at currently.
Absolutely amazed by his level. Absolutely happy about his way of working and his open mind way of thinking. So he came to us in the starting of the
went down in the wet 8th ahead of Jack Miller, who had a fall, and Pedro Acosta, who was the first to crash. Frankie Morbidelli 11th from Brad Binder, Iagora and Joan Zarco. And Ea Bastianini was 15th on the second of the Tech 3 KTMs ahead of Miguel Oliveira and Fabio Gian Antonio. Alex Rins ahead of our Phillip Island winner Raul Fernandez. Michele Pirro P20 ahead of his fellow test rider and substitute Lorenzo Salvadori. Augusto Fernandez got 11 laps in on the V4 Yamaha, 22nd ahead of Somkat Chatra.
Well, as quickly as the rain came here in Sepang, it has gone. It has already stopped. Here as we look at Fermin Aldeguer's dry work at the start of that session, medium front and medium rear tyre from the Spaniard. Lap 6, he found that 2:00.199. The next lap was not too far behind for the Spaniard.
Yeah, we ain't going to learn an awful lot from these, but let's have a look anyway. Pecco Bagnaia, just essentially the one run in. He got one lap into run 2 before the rain hit, but perhaps what was more interesting for Bagnaia was the conversations inside his box.
Honda charge being led by Mir. He was out on a hard,